Hola clase, ¿qué tal? Hoy vamos a revisar los verbos regulares del presente. So today we're going to review regular verbs in the present tense. The present tense is used a lot in English and in Spanish, and it's a really simple tense because we use it just to talk about things that we do all the time or things that we're doing right now in the moment. So examples would be like I eat, I sing, you play, he runs, we run, they climb. It's just a really simple formation. It just has like your subject and your verb, and it's not complex. We use this to tell stories sometimes if we're wanting to tell the story like it's happening instead of like it already happened in the past. We use this to tell jokes as well. An example of maybe a sentence using the present tense would be like he walks into a store and buys his groceries. She wakes up, brushes her teeth, and goes to school. I go to school every day and I leave at 3:15. Those are maybe just some examples of the present tense. It's just a really simple tense. The first thing that I want to do is review how to conjugate regular verbs. So there's 3 easy steps. The first step is to remove the ending AR, ER, or IR because all verbs in Spanish either end in AR, ER, or IR, like the verb hablar, comer, and vivir are just a few examples. The second step after we've removed the ending is to identify the subject of this sentence, right? So our subjects could be like I, which would be yo, could be we, nosotros. It's really important that we figure out who the subject is for our sentence, because then the third step is to add the ending that matches the subject. Let's go ahead and take a look at the endings for AR, ER, and IR verbs. Here's the endings for our AR verbs. So we have O, AS, AMOS, and AN. So please write these in your notes. So we have O, AS, A, AMOS, and AN. These are going to be the endings for all regular verbs that end in AR when we're talking in the present tense. So is what you're going to do, the first step, if you take a verb like hablar, that ends in AR, you're going to remove the AR. Okay, you're just going to end up with the stem or the root of the verb, HABL. And then you're going to add the proper ending. So if your subject is yo, you're going to add that O on the end. Yo hablo. Remember, yo is I. Tu, which is you. It's an AS ending, so tu hablas. If your subject is él, ella, or usted, which is he, she, or you, the formal version, then you end up with habla. You got an A on the end. If your subject is nosotros, we, you could say nosotros, or I could say mis amigos y yo, my friends and I. That's also saying we. Then we're going to add the amos onto the end, so we end up with nosotros hablamos. And then finally, if your subject would be ellos, ellas, or ustedes, which is saying like they or you all, the plural formal form, then your verb would be hablan. You would add the an onto the end. Here's the endings for ER verbs. So all regular ER verbs are going to take these endings. They'll take an O, ES, E, EMOS, and EN. So please write those in your notes. We've got O, S, A, amos, and N. So for all of our verbs that end in ER, like comer, we're going to get rid of that ER. We just end up with COM, com. Then we're going to add our endings to match our subjects. So yo como, tú comes, él, ella, usted come, nosotros comemos, and ellos, ellas, ustedes comen. And finally, for all of your regular verbs that end in IR, you're going to add the endings O, ES, E, IMOS, and EN. So you can write these in your notes. You've got O, S, A, IMOS, and N. For a verb that ends in IR, like vivir, you're going to do just like you did for AR and ER verbs. You're going to get rid of the ending. You're going to take off the IR and just find the root, the VIV, and then you're going to match it to your subject. So for yo, you're going to add an O on the end, so you end up with yo vivo. For tu vives. For él, ella, usted, it's vive, because you had the E. Nosotros vivimos, nosotros vivimos. For ellos, ellas, ustedes, you add the E end and you get viven. So for vivir, you get vivo, vives, vive, vivimos, viven. Okay, now for some examples. See if you can do these with me. So we've got tu tío, blank, el desayuno. So your uncle blanks the breakfast. And we've got the verb cocinar, which is to cook. So we're just going to take our verb cocinar and we're going to start by getting rid of that AR, right? We know that that's the first step. So go ahead and write the stem in the blank. And we know that the next step is to identify our subject. So tu tío, be careful with this because tío is your subject, right? Tu is just an adjective describing whose tío it is. It's saying it's your tío. The next step, now that we know that our subject is kind of like saying he, right, is to figure out, well, what's the correct ending for AR verbs whenever the subject is he? Well, we know that the ending is A, right? So all we have to do is add that A onto the end. So now we have tu tío cocina el desayuno. Your uncle cooks breakfast. Pretty easy, right? For this example, we are going to end up with yo escribir cartas con mis amigas. So I write letters with my friends. And to do our steps, we're just going to start with step 1. We're going to take the verb escribir and we're going to get rid of the IR at the end so we can write the rest of it in the blank here. We just stop when we get there to the ending. All right. And then we need to figure out what's going to go on the end of our verb. We're going to look at our subject. Our subject is yo. We know that's I. And whenever our subject is yo, we're always going to have an O ending. Okay. So we're going to end up with escribo. Yo escribo cartas con mis amigas. I write letters with my friends. I'm going to move through the steps a little bit quicker now. So we've got tu correr con tu perro. We're going to go ahead and put the first part of that in here. We're taking off that ER. We're going to look at our subject, which is tu, and we know that we always add an ES to the end for ER verbs when the subject is tu. So we've got tu corres con tu perro. You run with your dog. For this next one, we've got nosotros asistir a la escuela Faith. We'll go ahead and take off the ending. So we've got that in the blank. We look at our subject, which is nosotros, and we should know that the proper ending to put on here for this, since it's an IR verb and our subject is nosotros, we need to add an emos. So we end up with nosotros asistimos a la escuela Faith. We attend Faith School. Here's just some example sentences in the present tense. So Pedro habla con el maestro. Pedro talks with the teacher. Yo como una manzana y una galleta. I eat an apple and a cracker. Nosotros vivimos en el norte de la USA. So we live in the north of the United States. Or tú siempre comes muy rápido. Tú siempre comes muy rápido. You always eat very fast. On this final slide, I just want you to see the endings for AR, ER, and IR verbs beside each other. You can see some patterns. So for the yo form, all three types of verbs all have the same ending. All right. Even when you look here, they all still have a similar ending. They have the S, right? And then down here, it's just one vowel on each end. You still have most on the end of all of these, and you still have an N on all of them. So when you notice those patterns, it will help you remember them. The other thing that I'd like to point out is ER and IR verbs actually have very similar endings. So como, vivo, they both end in O. Comes and vives, they both end in ES. Come and vive both end in E. And then comen and viven, they both end in en. So really, the only difference between the endings for ER and IR verbs are the E and the I in the nosotros form. Otherwise, they have identical endings, which should make it a little bit easier to remember them. You're kind of only memorizing the endings for AR verbs, and then you're memorizing the endings for ER and IR verbs. So pay attention to those patterns, and it should help you remember your endings.